Part one of a four-part series. I'm Josh. I'm the Director of Business Development for Bureau Veritas for our Western Canadian environmental services, as well as our emerging markets. And I have my colleague Andrew here as well, who will take the vast majority of this presentation to walk you through a beginner's guide for PFAS sampling and developing successful programs. So we're really, really excited. But just to kind of kick off, Andrew, next slide. Um, we just wanted to quickly go through just our PFAS offering. So, number one, we do have the largest capacity in Canada, along with the largest scope. We continue to invest into this test this year. We are going to be adding another instrument here in the summer, and then we should have this in Quebec as well, coming in Q4. And we are really, really delivering on-time results. So right now we have a standard turnaround time of 10 days across the geography. We do have rush turnaround time available. In fact, there was a project that we just had a customer from an emergency basis looking to have results in 3 days, and we're able to do it if there's no reworks. And so our average turnaround time so far for the first, call it 99 days of the year, has been 8 days. This is over thousands and thousands of samples across a number of different jobs. And in fact, over 400 of those projects have been delivered early. So if turnaround time is an issue for you in different parts of the country, please contact us.
Thanks, Josh. So yeah, as Josh mentioned, I'm Andrew White. Been with BV for 21 years, and the last couple of years have been overseeing our Canadian efforts in the PFAS world. But yeah, this is the first of our spring series of PFAS talks. So today is sort of a one-on-one PFAS basics to give you a good sort of understanding of what PFAS is and what we do. But then we have some really great speakers coming up in the next couple of weeks where we're going to dive into sort of the current landscape of regulation around PFAS. There's a lot of requirements now for users of products that may have PFAS in them and what they need to know on reporting. And then our last one in July, or June actually, it should be talking about a very unique treatment solution. So to get started for today, I'm just going to turn my camera off so it's less distracting for you. Yeah, we're just going to sort of cover what is PFAS, some of the regulations that are applicable here in Canada, and then a bit of a deeper dive into how we analyze and some of the tools required to sort of make an assessment for PFAS on your sites, and then a quick overview on successful sampling. So if you've looked at any media coverage or the news in the last couple of years, PFAS has been pretty much a daily topic, and there's a lot we do know about it. It's been a very popular ingredient in firefighting foams, and I'm sure you've heard about it in Teflon frying pans and other water and stain resistant products. But when it comes to environmental sampling and sort of our daily lives, there are a lot of new sources that are popping up that are being found to have PFAS containing compounds in them. And so from a sampling perspective, it's just something to keep in mind when you are out sampling. So I won't bore you with too much chemistry, but what is PFAS? PFAS is per and polyfluoroalkyl substance. So they're made up of long chains of carbons, and then they have a fluoride bond. And it's one of the strongest bonds in chemistry. There are many short chain and very long chain, and so we're seeing a vast array of PFAS compounds pop up. And when it was discovered back in the many years ago, they found that it has very useful properties, and so it's being added to a number of products, and every iteration of this compound, we're starting to see thousands and thousands more PFAS compounds show up. And so those properties that it has, it's very heat, oil, and stain and water resistant. It is very effective at fire suppression, which you'll see most of the concern of PFAS has been at firefighting sites. It's very resistant to biodegradation, and it's really hard to destroy. One of the only ways so far has been incineration at a very high temperature. There are some other techniques that are cropping up, but so far that's been one of the most effective ways to get rid of PFAS. And one of the reasons why it is such a concern, it seems to like to replace some of the functions that fatty acids have in the body. And so you see that they have a very similar molecular makeup. And so what they've found is the PFAS likes to get into the spots where fatty acid would, and that can cause a whole multitude of different illnesses. And just to give you sort of a perspective on how widespread PFAS is, these are just two very quick maps of known hotspots of PFAS contamination. We're lucky in Canada that there isn't many. It was never a product that was manufactured in Canada. It certainly was used, but not manufactured, and so that sort of has limited the amount of sites that we're finding contamination on. But you can see in the States where it had pretty widespread use. These are just already known sites of PFAS contamination. And sort of sources that we know that are common sources for impacts, like I mentioned, firefighter training or fire response, where the AFFF firefighting foams were used. Obviously, from industry where it was produced, DuPont and 3M were the main producers, and so there's a lot of hotspots related to their facilities. And we are starting to see it accumulate in biosolids from wastewater treatment plants and certainly in landfills. But what we're starting to see in the industry across Canada, that it's starting to pop up in places where it wasn't really thought to be before. And so this is just a schematic of a mining site where PFAS containing products are actually used in many aspects of mining. And so now we're starting to see potential problems with PFAS contamination at mining sites. We're even seeing it in the runoff from continued use of fluorinated waxes at ski hills. Now we're starting to see PFAS show up in the runoff water there. If you've ever dealt with a site that's had storage tanks, even though they may not have had fires, one of the popular solutions to any spills to avoid fires at any storage facilities was to put AFFF foam down on the site. And so even though there may not be a history on your site of a fire, there could be a history of a spill where foam has been used to contain it. And then the other one that there's a lot of eyes on with regulation is biosolids being used on farms as nutrients or fertilizers. And a lot of those have been found to have trace levels of PFAS, and so there's certainly a concern from wastewater treatment plants that have been manufacturing sort of biosolids for use that there's concern for people. So here's just sort of a quick diagram. Because of the nature of PFAS, it is ubiquitous. It's very hard to break down, and so it very easily cycles around through many sort of environmental processes. It can be directly discharged to water. That water is then taken up and used on crops or as drinking water. that then sort of just cycles around back into a system. And so you get this perpetual cycle of PFAS that can stick around. As far as regulation goes, in Canada, it's certainly been an emerging experience. A lot of the regulation we've sort of followed suit with the states. A lot of the focus has been on just two compounds in particular, but we're seeing now to regulation looking at PFAS as a class and looking at it as from a total approach to ensure they capture any potential compounds that might be there. There are some, I'll go into a little bit deeper, but a lot of the provinces and regions have been left to determine their own guidelines, which is why you see in Canada we're a little bit behind compared to partners south of the border. I would expect to see in the near future, it's sort of a race to get regulations out there, but I wouldn't be surprised to start seeing more rigor around guidance or regulations around biosolids, wastewaters, and landfills. And so just sort of give you a picture, it has been quickly emerging. Health Canada has done a bunch of sort of draft updates, and then more recently this year, they've released their final State of PFAS report, which does give some guidance on dealing with PFAS on sites, and particularly with drinking water. And that sort of has led to a couple of approaches, one being this risk management approach under SEPA, and that's a three-phase approach that's coming into effect, where they're going to address some of the big concerns first, being firefighting foams, and then eventually phase in some of the other aspects with consumer products, and then other alternatives. The other piece of that puzzle is the National Pollutant Release Inventory, where facilities now have to start reporting on their levels of PFAS that they're either importing, recycling, or disposing of. And to give you a snapshot here in Canada, there's only a couple of provinces that have actual regulations in effect. Nova Scotia, British Columbia, and Alberta. Quebec has recently, they have one for biosolids, but not necessarily for soils yet. And Health Canada has been the one with their guidance on drinking water, where they're using a summed approach, 25 parameters. And then also recently, the CFIA has imposed some regulation around just one compound, PFAS, as part of biosolid use. And so the interesting thing is we are learning a lot about PFAS compounds, but it's not your average contaminant like, say, lead or hydrocarbons. We can test for a number of the targeted ones, but there is a lot of unknowns with PFAS compounds. And so when you have an approach or you have a site, there could be a lot of questions. And so we've built sort of a toolkit for analysis, where it's a combination of methods to give you a more complete picture of what you may have on the site. The first of those being analysis by LCMS. It is becoming sort of the recognized gold standard. It is limited to only a known set of compounds. We report on 47 of them right now. And it is sort of the recognized method for any regulatory compliance. It follows solid phase extraction, which is a technique of separation, and then it's put through the instrumentation where we're able to separate out the compounds and identify the concentrations of each one using mass spectrometry. The other approach is what we call the TOPS assay, or total oxidizable precursors. And that's trying to capture some of those unknowns that are precursor PFAS compounds that are breaking down into the known compounds that we can then detect on the instrument. And so we're putting your sample through an oxidative process to force sort of that natural breakdown. And then we can detect some of those known compounds that sort of gives you a picture of what may be the future state at your site. The other piece of the toolkit is TOF, or total organic fluorine. And this is sort of a capture-all approach where we're using organic fluorine as a proxy to try and capture any of those unknown PFAS compounds that might be there. Assuming that fluorine in a sample is coming from a PFAS source, it's going to give you see if there are other concerns or potential other projects there that just aren't known quite yet, or they don't have a standard or criteria that we can compare to. And here's sort of just a quick snapshot of when you might use all three. Certainly the TOF is great for high concentration or quick spill response. And then the other two are great in combination on when you're trying to either comply with regulation or to properly delineate your site. So one of the problems with PFAS is, as we've seen the compounds rapidly emerge, we've also seen the methodology sort of emerge, and close to 20 years ago, some EPA has developed most of the methods, starting with 537, and then that has slowly evolved, primarily adding parameters or improving on the techniques. And where we're at the moment is EPA 1633 as a method has become sort of the gold standard or the best operating standard for analyzing PFAS. But we've found, BV has been, we've been doing PFAS testing for almost 12 years, and we're seeing a lot of confusion between the parameters versus the methods and in regulations and what should we do. And so the key points or the key elements of a good PFAS test is using a solid phase extraction technique, isotope dilution, making sure that the laboratory that you use has a good quality control manual and they're following their ISO SOPs and are accredited and licensed for the method that they're using. And all this sort of leads to consistent and reliable results. And so our team has continually been optimizing the approach where we now have one method to use on all sample matrices, water, soils, and biosolids. And that allows us to have very consistent and tight quality controls and process the maximum amount of samples on a daily basis. What we've also learned, when there's been concern around different methods, the data produced from those, there's not a lot of variation, and we have seen any variation in results is usually as a result of either the sample themselves or field conditions. The two primary ones where we see data variance is if you're taking a water sample and there's a lot of sediment in there, that greatly biases results. And if you have soils that aren't very homogeneous, that can skew your numbers. Sampling conditions or techniques and the equipment used are other sources of variation. And so between batches and things in the labs, we don't see very much, but the greatest source of variation we are noticing in our experience has been from sediment or things in the field. Oops. There we go. So you may hear in the marketplace or from south of the border using a prescribed method or a modified method. In Canada, all environmental testing methods are essentially modified from originally written. Canadian practitioners, we've had the ability and the fortune that labs are able to make improvements for efficiency or cost effective improvements, or to improve on detection limits tests. And so, the modifications that are made by a lab aren't necessarily a bad thing. And so you may hear 1633 modified, or a particular method is modified. Almost all labs and all tests have been modified to some extent. It doesn't mean that the method is any less effective. It's usually been improved to some extent. So PFAS is one of the few tests that has really, really low detection limits. If you've done any environmental sampling, you're probably very used to parts per billion, or micrograms per kilogram, or micrograms per liter. However, with PFAS, we're actually measuring nanograms per liter. And to give you that perspective, that's the equivalent of 1 second out of 32,000 years. And so it is a challenge for labs, making clean spaces, ensuring quality controls at that sensitivity is one of the challenges with PFAS testing. Most criteria is between the sort of 2 to 4 nanograms per liter, and most of our detection limits are down at that level as well. So moving to successful sampling, as a general sort of overview of any environmental sampling, I think these are great questions to consider, and I always recommend engaging your lab partners if you do have a sampling program. What type of data are you requiring? What are your report deliverables? And certainly anything around your sample logistics, turnaround times, and detection limits are important to discuss with your lab when designing any sampling program. But more specifically for PFAS, I thought I would share what they say in the methods around sampling. And the actual methods don't give very much guidance themselves. Essentially, wash your hands and wear gloves and ship the samples at cold temperatures. And so you have to do a little bit more digging for good sampling techniques or good sampling protocols for PFAS. And I'll share them in a minute. But they do all recommend, and the best practice is to use containers that are either HDPE or polypropylene, and they do recommend including blanks. But to build a sampling program, there is some great literature out there. With these 5 groups have written some good protocols that are very extensive and very detailed. So if you are designing a program, I recommend looking at those. And they have a bunch of recommendations on what you should and shouldn't do with regarding PFAS sampling. Some of them are quite obvious. Don't use Teflon-lined products, Gore-Tex, or tubing. But then there's a few that surprises. The blue ice packs have been known to cause PFAS hits in samples. And then water-resistant field books and pens should be avoided. And those documents also recommend prepackaged food containers, and cosmetics and moisturizers and sunscreen should be avoided. And here's a list of sort of what they recommend as allowable items. They also have some avoid where possible. Some of it's quite common sense. If you're out sampling and you're not sampling a fire site, you shouldn't visit an AFFF training site prior to sampling. They suggest avoid filling your car on the day of sampling, and clothing made or washed with stain-resistant chemicals should be avoided. And here's sort of a look at common household items that are known to contain PFAS. And then in the field, it's things that are commonly used with water, sampling balers or split spoons for soil samples, or many of the pumps and things have Teflon tubing. You need to ensure that you're checking that you're not using these to take your PFAS samples as well. So there are a lot of Teflon lined products. The sampling containers that we have, we ensure that any that are used for PFAS no longer have Teflon lined lids. Where you'll notice some other containers will. And there's a really cool study out there done by these guys where they took a whole bunch of sort of typical field safety kit or field supplies, and they actually analyzed them for PFAS. And you'll see some of them, the adhesive wrappers of a first aid kit or your notebook cover, and they had positive hits for some of these common items. And you'll see, like, it doesn't take much to reach a concentration that's above some of the criteria. So, just over half a wrapper of a Band-Aid, you're seeing, 22 nanograms per liter. And there's just a quick look at containers. If you are sampling for PFAS, certainly check with your lab to ensure that they're proofing all their containers. We do proofing of everything that goes out the door, and are using the HDP or propylene containers. Don't use glass, and certainly don't use PTFE containers, which are becoming popular, because they're certainly going to come up on our scans as having a positive hit. The guidance does recommend using a field blank. What we've noticed is a lot of field blanks don't seem to pick up a lot of PFAS. It can be volatile in some situations, but we don't see it as much. Our biggest recommendation would be to include an equipment blank to ensure that if there's anything that you're using, you've ran lab-proofed PFAS-free water to ensure that anything that you're using is not going to be a source of PFAS as well. In the lab, we certainly follow good lab protocols. We separate samples for PFAS. They have sort of a separate lab flow, and we process them in fume hoods with disposable liners, so we ensure we're not introducing any PFAS products. That way, everything has been proofed before it's been used, and we do, even though some of the guidance says not to regularly wash your clothes, we do follow regular lab coat cleaning, and we follow appropriate QA and QC. And some of that QA, QC, a lot of it you'll see is on the lab side. Every batch of samples, we have method blanks, we have matrix spikes, we spike samples. There's standard reference materials, and PFAS uses a high number of surrogates to ensure we're getting the appropriate recoveries. As I've been doing this for the last couple of years and talking with customers, I've learned that there's some very elaborate field sampling SOPs, and some of them are very detailed in field samplers shouldn't shower on the day of sampling. They certainly no fast food takeout. If you've ever been sampling in northern sites where bugs and black flies and things are concerned, or in summer, you're certainly going to wear sunscreen or bug spray, which some of the literature says you shouldn't. And so I thought it would be a good idea to sort of challenge some of that guidance, because a lot of it seems very cumbersome for field teams to take on board, and a lot of time wasted on prepping for it. So we decided to do a little lab study. I grabbed four samples of proofed PFAS-free lab water. We're using our standard method and we put them through 4 little scenarios. So sample number 1 was exposed to as many everyday situations that we could find that maybe a field sampler might go through. Sample 2, I exposed it to sort of some common known potential sources of PFAS. Sample 3 was handled without gloves after being exposed to bug spray and other products, and then sample 4 was simply with gloves. So to give you what we did with sample 1, I brought it home. I left it in our laundry for a week, opened. I have 2 kids in hockey. We do a lot of laundry. We left it in a bathroom for a week and then in an office. Put it in a cooler with some of those blue ice packs for 5 days. I left it in our garage. And then I took it on a little road trip and did some of the things that suggested not to. So I went and filled up gas in my car. We went through a car wash. It came to hockey practice one day. And then it also came to fast food takeout, being exposed to containers and wraps from a fast food takeout. Sample number 2, I purchased just commonly available plumbing tape from Canadian Tire, and then a pair of Gore-Tex ski gloves, and basically just dipped both of those products in the sample bottle and then took them out. With sample number 3, I took every product that we had available for either bug repellent, moisturizer, sunscreen, and lathered my hands and arms in those products, and then grabbed the containers, poured them from one to another, and then put the lid back on. And then sample number 4 was without washing hands, simply putting gloves on those hands and then doing the same thing with those containers. I don't know we have time for a poll, but if anyone wants to put in the chat what they think in the next 15 seconds the results were, we could wait for that. Let's see. So what we found was interesting. The sample that we did all the things that the guidance suggests not to. We analyzed it, and we found that there was no impact at all. However, for the sample that had direct exposure to sort of known sources, that plumber's tape and a glove, we did have positive hits. And you'll see that for PFOA, result of 58, that's already above the Health Canada sort of drinking water guidance of 30 nanograms per liter. And we didn't leave it exposed for very long in that. I would say it was less than 15 minutes in the water. Surprisingly, the sample number 3 with all those products on my arms was non-detect, and then with gloves on, it was also non-detect for sample number 4. So I don't think this is not a foolproof design of experiment, but I wanted it to sort of highlight that, everyday exposure, you hear it in the news that PFAS is everywhere, and we should be worried about it. But from a sampling perspective, it doesn't seem like everyday exposure is going to be a significant source of contamination. And if you're following, standard good field practices where you're not sticking things in your samples and they're not coming in contact with other things, it's unlikely that you're going to cross-contaminate your samples. And this is, it's only 4 samples, but I think it's a good highlight to sort of say, PFAS doesn't seem to be everywhere, although we are finding it in some places. But like I sort of said, as long as you're following good practices, there's a high possibility that you're not going to cross-contaminate your sample. And just to sort of wrap it all up, when you're going out sampling, consider some of your potential sources, whether that be your personal safety equipment, um, the supplies and the sampling things that you're using. Um, if it's typical HDPE plastic, and it's not Teflon lined, or it's not advertised to have, non-stick or anti-stain or water-resistant properties, um, there's a much better chance of it not containing PFAS products. Um, always ensure you have good quality control measures, whether you're using equipment blanks, field duplicates, um, accurate chain of custodies, and good sampling practices. And then, as I said before, engage your lab partners if you do have concerns of.
I'll go this way. Okay. Come on, girls.
If you do have concerns.
Go ahead, Andrew.
Yes. Engage your lab. If you think there's a source in your field equipment, get some proof lab water from us. We can do an equipment test, and if anything's strange, certainly loop the lab in, and we can help you navigate some of those challenges. And one of the last pieces, sort of, which is interesting, we're finding that there's now that there's PFAS is becoming more public and well known in the marketplace, you're starting to see, products that are PFAS or PFOA free, which is great. It doesn't necessarily mean they're free of a perfluorinated compound, and what we're finding is there's many cases where that has been switched out for something else, and we've also, as recently as late as last year, there's a lot of specifications in the sort of consumer products industry where they're allowed to have up to 1 part per billion PFAS in their product. And so if you sort of look at that from a drinking water perspective, the criteria for drinking water is 30, whereas the manufacturer specifications on some things that they're allowing up to 1,000. And so, as I was saying before, I think you're going to start seeing a lot more rigor and regulation around end products and manufacturing come into effect. There's that national pollutant inventory I mentioned before, where there's going to be more requirements on people to report that their usage of PFAS in their products. And so, it is true, it is still an emerging compounded market space, and we're sort of living our way through it as changes rapidly happen, and we keep up with sort of the best science that we can for methodology, and the best advice that we can for sampling. So I see, thanks to Brody and the team that have been answering some questions along the way. My contact details are there, that if you have any more, and this was sort of meant as a quick overview and introduction to PFAS. I think someone asked if this would be available. We have recorded it, we'll probably post it somewhere. We can certainly share the slides with you as well, so definitely reach out if you would like.